Welcome to Island Baptist Church. Bill's lesson today is in Luke chapter 20, titled, Masterful Answers from the Master, Part 2.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Island Baptist. Happy Father's Day again to you dads out there. Luke chapter 20 is where we are, working our way. We worked our way all the way down to the last 4 days of Jesus' earthly ministry, which are going to take us, 4, almost 5 chapters to get through, and a lot longer than that as far as our time is concerned, because there's so much here for us to consider. So much that is going on, like I said, in your Gospels. Practically half of Mark is only concerned with the last 4 days of Jesus' ministry. There's so much that happens during that time, and of course, everything is critical and crucial. Doesn't matter who Jesus heals, doesn't matter who delivers from demons, it doesn't matter who he teaches or what he says. If he doesn't die and resurrect, it's all for naught. So the focus of the Scriptures is, of course, those events and the events of his suffering and taking our place, which we absolutely had to have. So Luke chapter 20, we're going to be down in verse 9 here in a bit. But the last time we were together, and we're in a series, I'm calling it here in chapter 20 and part of 21, a series I'm calling The Masterful Answers from the Master. And we saw this first little answer that Jesus gives here, this challenge, I guess you could say, not I guess, it for sure is, by this supposedly spiritual elite, was they wanted to know by what authority he cleared, like we've been saying, if you have been here, 32 acres. The Temple Mount, the Tour of the Gentiles is 32 acres, 24 football fields. We're not talking about an auditorium this size. We're talking about a gigantic place, and he does it, pretty much like that. And then they're, idiots enough to say, by what authority did you do such a thing? Oh, apparently by God's authority, but they simply can't get through that through their heads. But it's interesting that Jesus puts it back to them. He says, okay, I'll tell you what I did if you'll tell me what John did, effectively. And they said, we don't know, we can't say, because they were caught. He caught them at catch-22 there. And so he said, well, since you can't answer me, then I won't answer you. So does it tell us, and I believe it does, that there is a time in which we don't need to answer? I mean, as we answer questions, part of the important thing is to know not only what to say, but when not to say stuff. And Jesus was good at saying stuff and not saying stuff, and we seem to be bent on it seems anymore that the Christian world needs to have an answer, and sometimes the answer is to give no answer. And I think we're in a time like that, and I would submit to you we are based upon a couple of biblical reasons, but also simple logic. So we're shocked and appalled by the whole gender dysphoria thing. I don't know if you are, but I sure am. So forgive me and put your hands over your children's ears. So you stand naked in front of a mirror and can't tell me what sex you are. That's some serious confusion. I can't think of how could you possibly be more confused than that. And the few that I've spoken to truly are. There's fakers and liars in every group. Everybody trying to get mileage out of something, because it's the thing to do, it's the place to be, kind of thing. There are some absolutely legitimate, totally confused people, don't know what sex they are. Now, I can't think, like I said, how to be more confused than that. But again, our urge is, as Christians, we need to have an answer for that. And I would suggest to you, and it's my suggestion, no, you don't. Number one, isn't the answer patently obvious? And they can't see it? So why are you telling them is going to help them when they can't look in a mirror and tell, but somehow you're going to say something that's going to blow them away? Why do we need to give an answer to this? Number one. Number two, the reason why they're confused is because they're overwhelmed by sin. They're debauched. Do you argue with a drunk person? These people are overwhelmed. They are inebriated by the culture of sin that we live in today. You don't argue with a drunk person. You don't beat up a drunk person. What do you do with it? You got a buddy who goes out and gets himself sloshed because something's going on. What do you do with that person? Stand him in a road? Make fun of him? Take a picture of him and send it to the local newspaper? You protect him, don't you? You protect him from the world, protect him from himself, because he's gotten himself in a bad way. This I see is more important a stance for Christians, but even bigger than that. And again, I'm just giving you my opinion. What's Bill's opinion worth? I would suggest to you not very much. But I am going to give you the directives of the Scripture. And the directives of the Scripture are real clear about what we say and what we don't say, and they fall into a large category. here. We need to be careful because I don't see a whole lot of stuff. I don't watch the news. I recommend that for you. It's a great life. Because then it's just, people are lying to you anyway. You just eliminate another section of people that are lying to you, because that's all that's happened, in my opinion, there. But here's a great thing. Here's the real news. The real news is what God has called us to do and what the Spirit has instructed us to do in His Word. And this is what He says to us. But refuse foolish and ignorant arguments. That, I think, qualifies. What's happening today very much qualifies. It's foolish, it's ignorant, knowing, notice, that they produce quarrels. We've got a lot of Christians quarreling today. Quarreling with lost people. So you're arguing, you're yelling at a drunk person. He's been inebriated and overcome by sin, and you're going to yell at them because that's going to make a difference. I'm suggesting to you that it's not. And in fact, I'm saying it to you clearly because it tells us here, the Lord's servant bondservant, must not be quarrelsome. I don't care what it is. As far as the lost world is concerned, you're not in a quarrel. There is no quarrel that produces anything good. And isn't that the point? Or I should say, is the point that you be right? Or that the world think you're right, I should say? Or that you win a person? What's the difference? I mean, what's more important here? Keep in mind, what are we called to do? So that the world will know that I've got the right answers. No, it's not about you. It is about them. You're on the way to heaven already. You've trusted Christ as personal Savior. They're the ones that are in a compromised position. They're the ones that we need to care for and bend over backwards for as much as we possibly can. Notice, be kind to all. Are you doing that? Skillful in teaching, patient when wronged. How's that going? Super good. I'll talk to you after the guy cuts you off this afternoon on the bridge. With gentleness, correcting those who are in opposition. Notice gentleness, if perhaps God may grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth. There it is, 2 Timothy chapter 2. Jesus, listen, dealt constantly with confused and debauched people. He never quarreled with them. Name the people who are in moral corruption in the New Testament, in the Gospels, and you always find them. Jesus is never confronting them. They are instead coming to Him to wash His feet, pour oil over His head, wipe His feet with their hair. The first one that shows up at the grave after His resurrection is a woman named Mary Magdalene, for whom He's removed 7 demons from her. I mean, that's the class of people that we're talking about today that we're having such a problem with. We feel like we make some kind of quarrel or argument with. He never argued with these people. He was exactly like He instructs us. He was patient with them. He was gentle with them. He corrected them. And they came to repentance. Quarreling with them won't bring them to anything other than a much more solidified position opposite of yours. We're not called to quarrel with anybody, especially the lost world. Jesus, the only time He engaged with anyone, I guess you could say, in a quarrel, is the supposedly spiritual elite who promoted false doctrine. He went head to head, toe to toe, eyeball to eyeball with them. But the average lost, confused sinner, he did just this. Exactly what He's telling us to do. So that's the free part. We're not even into Luke yet. So now you're going to get the paid part. Luke chapter 19. Actually, we're in chapter 20, but I'm going to give you chapter 19 because we need to be refreshed to where we are. So Jesus has rode in on this donkey. It's miraculous. He shouldn't have been able to ride a donkey that's ever been ridden before, with people waving their arms and singing, but that was a miracle. And it was an additional miracle, but we never recognize it. He comes into a temple and clears 32 acres. That's how big the court of Gentiles was, and it was full. He does it pretty much like that. Massive miracle. Nobody's questioning His miracles. The priests and the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they don't question it. They just want to know, tell us by what authority you're basically ruining all our trade. Because that's all they're doing there. And then they continue. It ends in chapter 19 with these 2 groups that are set up here who are waiting for Jesus to say the right thing. First group is He was teaching daily in the temple. So this is only 4 days. He occupies it for 4 days. From the time He enters until the time He's crucified, you only got 4 days. He was teaching in the temple daily in the temple, but the chief priests and the scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to put Him to death. Yet they could not find anything that they might do. So they're waiting for the one word, one sentence One move. They're going to be asking him questions here. Again, our series here in chapter 20 and 21 is the masterful answers of the master, because they're going to come at him with some really tough questions. And let me just say this also as a word of encouragement. The Bible says, part of our ability, being able to answer our world, that we have the mind of Christ. We have the answers, guys, when they need to come. We really do. And we don't have to be belligerent about it. And we can't be quarrelsome, argumentative about it, because the Scriptures have told us don't do that. We have the mind of Christ. We have the Spirit of Christ. So we look at the world and say, oh my goodness, we're wringing our hands. What are we going to do? Guys, there's nothing to worry about. The Lord has already supplied everything that we need. Trust Him. Meditate on His Word. Meditate on the way He acts here. So He's got a group, first of all, is trying to kill Him, and they're never going to get their answer. He's never going to give them a shot because He's the master. They're messing with the master. And then the second group that is in this is that last clause. For all the people were hanging on every word. Now, this is the same people who praised Him as He's riding down the Mount of Olives, who've now got into the temple. They've watched Him clear 32 acres. What are they expecting next? Call to arms. March on the Roman garrison. If this guy can clear the temple, he could wipe out the Romans. Let's go. Here we go, right? We have two groups that are waiting for Jesus to say the right thing for them. And neither one of them get it. They never get what they want from Him because, like I said, He's the master. So He continues to answer either questions they ask or questions they don't ask. In that case, verse 9 is where we find ourselves. And He began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it out to vine growers, went on a long journey, for a long time. And at the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers in order that he might give some of the produce to the vineyard from the vineyard. Of course he did. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave. And they beat him. Would you have done the second slave? He does a third. They treated him shamefully. He sent away empty-handed. He proceeded to send a third. And this one also they wintered and cast out. And so the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? That's a preposterous question. Isn't it patently obvious what you should do? May I just say to you, would you do what he suggests in his head that he should do? I know what I'll do. I'll send my beloved son. Would you send your son? These kind of yahoos? This is a crazy story. Absolutely crazy. I'm just trying to help you understand how they would have taken it. They would have been shocked at this story. Perhaps they will respect him. Oh, yeah, no, they won't. And when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, this is the heir. Let's kill him, that the inheritance will be ours. And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What, therefore, here's the conclusion, will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, may it never be. They knew who Jesus was talking about, and we're gonna see that. So the second masterful answer from the master is right here in front of us. Remember what a parable is. A parable means to lay alongside. Jesus was master at this. He would take a part of life that they knew very well, vine growing, for instance, sheep raising. And he would lay it alongside something they did not know, in particular about God. Take from what they knew to take them into what they do not know in order to communicate a message. And so that's what's happening here, this scenario. So it's common sense, this story. All of Jesus' parables were basically common sense. He would take a certain point that they knew, and then he would take them to a point that they didn't know, and he would flip it on them so they would now understand. And that happens in this story. As an example, in chapter 15 of Luke, what man of you has 100 sheep, he loses one, doesn't go look for him? Well, they all knew what sheep were. Anybody here raise sheep? None. Back then, it would have been 100%. Today, I've got to tell you, and by the way, I have to study before I do that to find out even what sheep are. What they do, where they live, what they eat, how to take care of them. In this culture, nobody had to tell them. They were raised with sheep. They ate sheep. They lived off the wool of sheep. They sacrificed sheep. Sheep were very common, and the same is true with this parable that he tells. A man went and planted a vineyard. The most common things that happen in their lifestyle, surrounding the hills of surrounding Jerusalem, were all these terraced vineyards. They were very familiar with. Most of them there had either worked in vineyards or owned vineyards or both. So no explanation needed. They understood grapes. They understood grapevines. They understood wine production. Wine was integral to their lifestyle. They had no water for purification systems. You drink purified water. You know how they purified their water? They poured a little wine in it. Every child at every meal, if they drank water, had wine poured in with it. They were not alcoholics. Some were. But mainly it was just the way that they lived. Otherwise, you drink all these bugs. So it's the way they did things. Everybody understood wine production, grapes, and vines. So number one, that he plants a vineyard, that's common sense. Another thing is common sense that he rented it out. If you had bigger than your own just personal garden, if you had anything bigger than that, of course you rented it out. You couldn't do it yourself. I mean, you're going to lose the grape harvest. You're not going to be able to handle the vines. You're not going to be able to handle the property correctly. So you would almost always, if you had much property at all, almost always rent it out. Again, this is a common experience. That's what a parable is. So he's telling them something that's very common. And also the way that they did salaries was a little bit different. There was no salary. So if I rented it to you, and I was the landowner and you were the worker, I would rent it to you for a certain amount of the production. And whatever you made on that property, that, by the way, that would be based on previous years. Let's say that the land has made 20 barrels of wine in the past. So I would say, as a landowner and you're a worker, and we would sign this document together, that I'm letting you rent it for 20 barrels. Whatever you make above those 20 barrels is yours. So if you do really good and work really hard and put yourself into it and put your ingenuity into it, and it makes 40 barrels, my contract is only 20. Guess what you get with those 20? You get all to yourself. And so you basically set your salary. You work really hard. You know what you're doing. You're dedicated. You can make actually as much as the landowner possibly can. It was almost free enterprise. Great system. And in many cases, the owner would do what this one does, which, by the way, was another common thing. Goes into a far country for a long time. By the way, when they went into a far country, it was always for a long time. Now, we live close to another country, right? Been to Mexico? I don't know, if just 5 miles south of here, as the crow flies. 25 miles it takes to get to, I think, the Los Tomates Bridge here in Brownsville. Takes 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, depends on who's driving and what kind of traffic is, to get to the border. For them, if the country was that far away, that's a 2-day trip just to get there. 15 miles per day, because you're mainly using these. We get in a car and we hop over. It's nothing for us to be in a country and back in the same day, or in a country and back within a couple of days. But if they ever went to a foreign country, it was always for a long time. You may only do it ever once in your whole life. In the New Testament, as an example, and we've made this point in the past during Christmas time, the wise men, when they travel to see Jesus, they're at least traveling a year and a half, maybe 2 years, one way to come see Jesus. Just the way it was. Just the way it was. So again, all these things are common sense. Plant a vineyard, yes. Rent a vineyard, of course. Take a long time when you go to another country, of course. Nothing out of this is out of the ordinary in any way to understanding. The pivot comes. The place where he catches them is now he leaves what's commonly known, and he enters into a realm that absolutely didn't happen in their culture. Verse 10. At the harvest time, when he sent the slave to vine growers in order that he might give him some of the produce of the vine, which, of course, like I said, they contracted for this. The vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. This did not happen. There's a number of reasons why it didn't happen. Number one, this culture is not like ours. So if we live in a certain community and we make it bad for ourselves reputation-wise, what do? We pull up a move. They didn't do that. Number one, they had nowhere else to go. Number two, that's where all your family is. That's where all your heritage is. That's where all your inheritance is. So when you lived in a community, you had to be careful what you said and careful what you did, because if you made it bad for yourself, it would be bad for you the rest of your life. So these vine growers, for instance, would have been from that community. They're not traveling anywhere. They're from there. Almost certainly related, or possibly at least extensively, and at a certain extent, related to the guy who owns the land. You never did this. Because if you ever did this, you would never work in this town again. Because this guy, of course, is related or affiliated with every other vine grower in the area, and he would say, these guys are terrible. You can sign a contract with them, and they won't come through when you send someone to get your produce. And so guess what? You wouldn't do this. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You're burning down your own possible business. And by the way, you've got a lot of freedom here. So if I'm really good and know what I'm doing, I don't have to own any land, and I can get as much money as without owning land as the person who owns it. So why would I ever do something like this? This is preposterous. It didn't happen, or it almost never happened. In addition, not only would there be one standing there listening to this story who worked in a vineyard who would say, "Oh, I would never do that." There's also people who own vineyards listening to this story. And what's their reaction? "Oh, buddy, if that ever happened to me, I'd be so mad." You ever been drawn into a story? Why do you watch movies? Why do you read books? Because it draws you in, right? It pulls you in. The writer or the actors or whatever have this gift to be able to draw you into their thinking, into their experiences. If it doesn't do that, you put it down, right? Or you turn it off. That's a terrible movie. They didn't communicate to me at all. But the ones that are good, they suck you in. And even though it isn't reality, you end up crying, you end up laughing, you end up excited over what? Over just something that they drew you into. This is what Jesus is doing. He is the master. He has their attention. He's pulling them in. He's going to get a visceral response from them in this process. So the first inclination is for them to say, "Who's doing that?" No one does that. These guys are criminals. Again, he's pulling it out of them. Matthew's version even tells us that they get so perturbed. Jesus even first, before he even gives his own answer, he asks the crowd, "So what do you think should happen to these guys?" Here's their answer. When the owner, here's Jesus asking, "of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers?" He puts it to the crowd. Here's the crowd's response. They said to Jesus, "He will bring those wretches," I'm just interpreting here, "He'll bring those wretches to a wretched inn and lease the vineyard to other vine growers." I don't think it's a stretch, my little interpretation. I don't think that's a stretch. Strong language there. Because it was a part of their culture. They understood this. And they were thinking, "Oh, you don't do that. That's terrible. That's horrible." They're upset. And so he grabs them. Excellent storyteller. Grabs them with something that they know, something they understand, and then he pivots in the middle of it so that they're caught in it now, and they can't believe it. They're shocked and appalled, and Jesus begins to lay on them, or they begin to realize as at the end, the information that he's communicating ultimately to them. And here's the information. This is not about a landowner. This is about the one who owns all of it, God. And the vineyard are his people, and the tenants who are criminals are their leaders. He's pulling them in. He's caught them. So let's get back to the story, back to a question we asked before. So they maim and mistreat all of your owners. Put yourself in all your servants. Put yourself in their position. They maim and mistreat all of your servants. In fact, it tells us in Matthew's version that they even kill some of these servants. So they maim, mistreat, cast out, and even kill some of your servants. And you send, your next thought is to send your son? Would you do that? Maybe I should say, would you be dumb enough to do that? I don't think you would. In fact, I'd be willing to bet a lot of shrewd business people in here, the first altercation, the first time after they've signed a contract, they've ratified it before the fathers of the city, and the first servant you send, and these guys treat him that way, boom, hammer's going to drop on these guys. You would have no problem whatsoever, you can tell by their response, of finding locals who will put an end to this kind of disturbance. They will not put up with it. You will find other vine growers and property owners who will band together to make sure that these guys never work in this town again after the first altercation. But they get 3. And then he sends his son? Would you do that? You would not do that. So Jesus, again, the master of the story, the master of the parables, and the parables are his masterpieces. And he regularly sets up this of, I call it the of course you would or the of course you wouldn't scenario. So first of all, he does the of course you would scenario. He says, plant a vineyard, of course you would do that. Rent it out, of course. Send your servant to ask for proceeds. Of course. But then the tenants rebel and abuse his servants. Oh, no. You would never do. Of course you wouldn't do that. But he takes it to another level. It even, I guess you could say, a higher level of craziness. So he sends his son. This is a crazy story. It's a preposterous story. I'm just trying to help you see how they would have seen it. Preposterous. I mean, in that world, the patience of the owner would have gone no further than the first altercation, like I said. The story verges on the ridiculous, and it begins at a very unusual point. And again, my dramatization. It begins at what is called a soliloquy. You know what a soliloquy is? It's when a person in a story has a conversation with himself. Here's the story. What shall I do? It's in the story. Sorry, I'm not a very good actor. What shall I do? Well, like, you big dummy, what do you mean what you should do? You should have stopped it at first. Why is he even asking this question? I mean, you don't have to have any kind of business sense whatsoever to know, oh no. Oh. You're certainly not going to send your son unless he's armed in a tank or something. He's not going there. The answer to the question, though, is extremely important for us. In fact, I would say eternally important for us. You very much need to know the answer to this question. Because it's not a oh, what shall I do question. This is the sovereign of the universe standing in between heaven and hell, between you and hell, asking, what should I do with you? You need to know the answer to this question. In fact, you need to be able to explain to me or explain to yourself why God should let you live past today. Because I guarantee you, I can't come up with an answer for you. Outside of somehow God finds it within himself to endure you and me one day longer. Not kill you and throw you into hell. You need to be able to answer this question. Because I'm telling you, that's the only thing, this question is the only thing standing between us and an eternity separated from God. Jesus is posing a question, not of a regular landowner, but of the sovereign of the universe, who has sent his servants to us to preach the truth, to tell us the truth, who we've mistreated, who we've neglected, who we've considered liars, who we've thrown out, whom we've killed and ignored and abused. And the response of the human race is, you'll never rule over us. He'll never have say over us. He can't stop me from doing what I want to do. So I'm going to put you in the position of God. So if you were God, what would you do with us? What would you do? Would you ever get to the place where you said, maybe I'll send my son? You would never do that. You're not that crazy. Because you know what we will do to your son because of the way we've already acted. Is that not right? In fact, God did. In fact, it tells us from the very beginning, from the very beginning of Genesis, God knew we were going to kill his son. In fact, he hangs everything on that killing. Everything on the death of his son. The only chance he has of getting us back. Would you ever put up with that? I'm sorry, I love all of y'all, but I wouldn't give my son for any of you. Love you to death, but not enough, apparently. And I certainly, if you continue to do that and you killed my son, there would be no help for you whatsoever if I had power over your life. That would be it. God, on the other hand, is not like us at all. He is not. He does not think like us. He does not reason like us. He does not come to conclusions like us. He's already been way more patient, way more merciful, and way more gracious than any of us would have ever been. This little soliloquy is the whole universe. Heaven and hell are hanging in the balance. Story about God and his relationship with us. It's about God not at all like us, doesn't reason like us. God who is weird, at least in our thinking, who his only problem is that he loves sinners. If he could just flip a switch and not love sinners anymore, this all goes away. No more devil. No more need for talking about heaven and hell. It all goes straight back to heaven the way it always was prior to this. It all goes back to perfection. It all goes back to things that are righteous. There's no more tears in heaven. Only tears there by God, and he sheds a lot for us. It all goes away for God if he quits loving us. It's just that simple. but he won't do it. He loves us. We would never be so gracious. We would never be so seemingly naive as to send our one and only Son for people like you, like me. Never. We would never do that. It's the whole point of the story. And so seemingly crazy question that comes in the form of a soliloquy. What shall I do? See, God's holding all the cards. All of them. What shall I do? It's a total decision within himself. He can't base his decision upon what you and I have done because we all are toast if that's true. He can't base his decision on anything in the past or anything as his knowledge of the future, which is 100% correct. He has to base itself on who he is. Gracious and kind and forgiving, not wanting any to perish, but all to come to repentance. And so based upon that, knowing what we would do, he sends. He sends his Son. And in that process, rescues us, changes us, reaches us, does for us something we would never do for ourselves. I'd ask if you would bow your heads and close your eyes with me as we finish thinking our thoughts on this powerful story. God knows everything. God sees. If we were God, we would never be so nice to ourselves. We would have never tolerated this. We would have never been put up for this. And we look and see how Jesus draws these people into a story to ask such an important question. And they end it by saying, oh, may it never be. But it's where we are today. Everything's in the hands of God. And God has decided that he wants to forgive. God has decided, not us, that he wants to be gracious to us. God has decided that he wants to offer us repentance from our rebellion against him. And in fact, he pursues us with that option till the day that we die. Lord, we thank you for your patience and kindness and forbearance toward us. We thank you, Lord, that even though you knew, you still sent your Son. Even though you knew what we would do to him, you chose what we would do to him as being our only way of salvation. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for being so patient, so kind, so generous toward us. We want to rededicate ourselves to you today. God, we want to say to you, you're the King. We want you to be Lord. We want to stop living in rebellion against you. We want to say no to the things that you want us to say no to and yes to the things you want us to say yes to. We want to turn away from our own way, Lord, our own way that is in rebellion, Lord, and turn back to you. Thank you, God, for hearing us today. Thank you for speaking to us this great message. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for visiting. Find us at www.islandbaptistchurch.org.